A family vanishes. It was just after 7:45 a.m. on a quiet Monday morning in late May when the first call came in to the Sonoma County Sheriff's Office. A neighbor on Maple Hollow Drive, a winding cul-de-sac tucked deep into the redwoods of Northern California, reported something strange. The front door of the Sterling home had been wide open for hours. Their dog, a normally docile golden retriever named Marley, was pacing in the yard, barking incessantly. No one had seen the kids come out to catch the school bus. It wasn't long before a second call followed, this time from a delivery driver, who, upon walking up to the door to drop off a package, saw what he described as something terrible inside. He didn't wait around to give more details. He just backed away, got in his van, and called 911. Deputies arrived at the home within minutes. What they found inside would haunt the entire department for years to come. 3 young girls, ages 4, 7, and 10, were found dead in their respective beds. Each showed no signs of struggle. They looked like they were asleep, but they weren't. They had been smothered, likely with pillows. There were faint bruises along their necks and wrists. Each wore matching pajamas tucked in lovingly, as if kissed goodnight. But the most disturbing detail was not what the killer had done, but how calmly they seemed to have done it. The mother, 38-year-old Emily Sterling, was found barely alive. On the floor of the master bedroom, blood pooled around her torso from what appeared to be 2 stab wounds, one to her abdomen, one near her shoulder. She was unconscious but breathing shallowly. EMTs worked frantically to stabilize her before rushing her to Memorial Hospital in Santa Rosa, and the father, 41-year-old Lucas Sterling, was gone. At first, there was chaos. Police cordoned off the home, interviewing neighbors, combing the house for signs of a break-in, an intruder, anything that might explain the unthinkable. But there were no broken windows, no signs of forced entry, no indication that anyone had entered or left, aside from the unlocked front door. It wasn't long before Lucas, once considered a potential victim, became the prime suspect. He was last seen the night before by a neighbor sitting on the porch with one of his daughters. They were watching the sunset. It looked peaceful, the neighbor later recalled, like any other evening. He waved at me. Investigators quickly pulled phone records, financial activity, and security footage. That's when they found it. Grainy footage from a home. Surveillance system across the street showing Lucas around 3:12 a.m., long after the rest of the neighborhood was asleep, walking down the driveway in a hooded jacket and hiking backpack. He didn't appear to be in a rush. He wasn't running or panicked. In fact, he seemed oddly composed. He walked away from the house and into the darkness, alone. The Sterlings were, by all accounts, a quiet, middle-class family. Lucas had once worked as a park ranger at Shasta Trinity National Forest, a position he held for nearly 12 years before resigning 6 months earlier. Emily was a part-time substitute teacher at a local elementary school and active in the PTA. They attended church, hosted potlucks. The girls, Ava, Haley, and June, were regulars at the local library and often rode bikes through the cul-de-sac in matching helmets. On the outside, they were picture perfect. But as the investigation deepened, cracks began to show. Detectives learned that Lucas had been growing increasingly withdrawn in recent months. After leaving his ranger job, he'd become obsessed with wilderness survival, not just as a hobby, but a way of life. He'd built what he called go bags for each family member, kept backup supplies in a hidden cache outside the house, and even dug a shallow root cellar in the backyard. He'd also begun homeschooling the girls on certain days without Emily's approval, teaching them about cleansing fire and the world's inevitable decay. Emily's friends would later reveal that she had been fearful for months. She said he was different, like something in him had cracked, said a close friend, who asked not to be named. He'd always been a little intense, but now he was, talking about end times and how the girls needed to be spiritually ready. Emily didn't know what to do. Unbeknownst to Lucas, Emily had made an appointment with a divorce attorney just 2 weeks before the killings. As investigators pieced together the events of that fateful night, a timeline began to emerge. Shortly after midnight, Lucas disconnected the home's Wi-Fi router and disabled the security system from the main control panel. At 12:42 a.m., all cameras inside the house went offline. By 1:15 a.m., police believed the girls were already dead. There was no sign of struggle in any of their rooms. No defensive wounds, no overturned furniture, just silence, and 3 small bodies lying in peaceful stillness. Emily was attacked sometime after that. Forensics suggest she had been sleeping in the master bedroom when Lucas confronted her. A trail of blood and fingernail marks down the hallway suggests she tried to crawl away before losing consciousness. But the most chilling evidence came later that afternoon, when detectives found a hidden journal beneath Lucas's side of the bed. It wasn't just a diary. It was a manifesto, dozens of pages handwritten in near-perfect cursive. Apocalyptic in tone, rambling, religious, paranoid, he called the modern world rotted, spoke of rebirth through suffering, of burning away sin. One passage read, "They must not grow up in this world. They deserve more than this filth we've left them. I will deliver them to something purer. I will not let them suffer. I will guide them myself." Investigators were stunned. Lucas, once known as the friendly forest ranger who volunteered at school field trips and taught children how to identify local flora, had turned into someone unrecognizable. And now he was on the run. Given his deep knowledge of the wilderness, especially the dense, rugged terrain of Northern California's mountain ranges, police feared he had disappeared into the backcountry. Worse, they knew he could survive there indefinitely. Lucas had years of experience in orienteering, shelter building, and living off the land. He'd trained rescue teams, knew how to cover his tracks. If anyone could vanish into the wild and never be seen again, it was him. Authorities launched a statewide manhunt focusing on the Trinity Alps wilderness area where Lucas was known to hike frequently. Rangers reported a few unconfirmed sightings of a lone hiker fitting his description. Tall, lean, wearing a battered camo jacket and carrying an old military pack. One camper reported hearing a man shouting scripture into the forest at night. Another found a campsite that had been abandoned just hours before they arrived. Still warm coals and fresh boot prints left behind, but there was still no sign of Lucas. Meanwhile, Emily remained in critical condition. She underwent emergency surgery and was placed in a medically induced coma. Detectives could only hope she'd survive, and when she did, perhaps offer answers no one else could give. By the third day, media outlets nationwide had picked up the story. The headlines were chilling. Father vanishes after daughters found dead in home. Lucas Sterling, former ranger or murderer in hiding. Survivalist dad hunted by FBI in triple child killing. Back on Maple Hollow Drive, a growing memorial appeared outside the Sterling home. Teddy bears, handwritten cards, flowers wilting in the summer heat. Photos of the girls taped to the fence, their toothy smiles forever frozen in time. No one could believe it. But the evidence was overwhelming. 3 little girls were gone. A mother clinging to life, and a father, somewhere out there, on the run. And for now, the only person who truly knew why was still out in the wilderness. The man who taught kids how to survive the wild may have become the monster who knew how to disappear in it. In the days following the murders of Ava, Haley, and June Sterling, and the sudden disappearance of their father, Lucas Sterling, investigators began peeling back the layers of a man who, on the surface, had lived an unremarkable, even admirable, life. But as they soon discovered, beneath the quiet forest ranger exterior was a troubled, calculating mind, and perhaps the chilling beginnings of a man unraveling for years. Lucas Sterling had once been a model public servant. For over a decade, he worked for the National Park Service, primarily in the sprawling wilderness of Shasta Trinity National Forest, an expanse of nearly 2.2 million acres. There, he gained a reputation as dependable, low-key, and fiercely committed to the land. He led guided tours for local school children, taught wilderness first aid, and gave lectures on forest preservation at local town halls. But colleagues now recall a darker side that emerged over the last 2 years. According to one co-worker who spoke with detectives under the promise of anonymity, Lucas began to withdraw from group meetings. He grew suspicious of new hires. He started warning others that civilization was collapsing and that most people wouldn't be ready when the lights went out. He went from talking about invasive plants to talking about moral rot, the co-worker told detectives. We thought maybe it was stress or burnout. Looking back now, we missed the warning signs. His personnel file reflected none of this. Lucas had no formal complaints against him, no history of disciplinary action. But what stood out was his abrupt resignation in November 2024. No reason was given. No 2 weeks' notice. He simply turned in his badge, keys, and field gear, then left the ranger station without a word. When police visited Lucas's former office to examine what he left behind, they discovered a hand-drawn map tucked between old trail guides. It was crude but detailed, highlighting several areas deep in the forest that weren't part of marked park trails. Next to one location, a small red X was drawn beside the words, "The Clean Ground." Investigators had no idea what it meant yet. Back at the Sterling family home, forensic teams continued to comb through every inch. In the garage, they found a wall covered in tactical gear: ropes, compasses, water filters, fire-starting tools, bear spray, and several knives, all meticulously arranged on a pegboard. There were shelves stocked with canned goods, MREs, and jugs of distilled water. A heavy-duty duffel bag was missing, assumed to be the one Lucas took with him the night he disappeared. More disturbing, however, was what they found in the attic. There, tucked beneath insulation panels, was a steel lockbox secured with a 4-digit code. After guessing multiple combinations, eventually landing on the birthday of Lucas's eldest daughter, investigators cracked it open. Inside were journals, at least 6 of them. Hundreds of handwritten pages, some scribbled in manic looping, cursive, others neat and deliberate. They ranged in content, but many shared one haunting theme: sacrifice. One entry read, "We've raised lambs in a slaughterhouse and called it progress. What's coming won't spare the innocent. Maybe they'll thank me when the flames come." Another said, "Ava asked about God today. I told her the truth. We don't meet God in church. We meet him in the dirt, in the silence, where we listen long enough to hear the cleansing." These weren't the writings of a man preparing for survival. They were the words of someone preparing for judgment. And in his twisted mind, that judgment involved his own family. Detectives brought in FBI behavioral analysts to examine the material. Their preliminary conclusion: Lucas may have developed a religious delusion, possibly psychosis. He believed he had been called to act as a kind of spiritual executioner, saving his daughters from a corrupted world. The term folie à un was discussed, a rare condition where a person develops a fixed delusional belief without direct psychotic symptoms. But one thing was clear: Lucas had become obsessed with purity, sin, and the wilderness as a form of divine reckoning. The question was, how long had this been going on? Emily's sister, Melanie, gave investigators chilling insight. She told them Emily had grown increasingly worried about Lucas over the past year. "He started pulling the girls out of birthday parties. Said they were being exposed to poisons," Melanie said. "He didn't want them watching TV, didn't let them eat anything with sugar. But it wasn't just about health, it was about control." Melanie revealed that Lucas began hosting lessons for the girls in the woods behind their house. He called them soul trainings. He made them sleep outside in tents to build fortitude. Sometimes they came back with scratches and bruises. Emily told Melanie she planned to leave him, that she was scared he'd snap one day. She told me 2 weeks before it happened, "If anything ever happens to me, it won't be an accident." But Emily never reported any of this to police. She feared it would escalate things, or worse, that no one would believe her. Then came a break in the case. On the morning of May 31st, 2 days after the murders, a hiker in the Trinity Alps wilderness reported a man matching Lucas's description, walking along a ridge near Canyon Creek Trail. The hiker said the man looked worn and sunburned, carrying a long walking stick and a weathered backpack. When the hiker greeted him, the man said nothing. He just stared, then turned and walked in the opposite direction. That same afternoon, rangers found a crude lean-to shelter about 2 miles from the reported sighting. Inside, they found remains of a small fire, empty food wrappers, and most notably, a spiral notebook, water-damaged but legible. On the last page were just 4 words, scribbled in charcoal: "I freed them first." For law enforcement, the meaning was all too clear. Lucas had not snapped in a moment of passion. He hadn't been triggered by an argument or a mental break. He had planned this. He had prepared for it. And then, once his mission was done, he vanished into terrain he knew better than any search team ever could. The FBI issued a nationwide alert. Border crossings were monitored. Satellite imagery was pulled. Every known associate of Lucas was questioned. But the working theory remained. He was deep in the wild, alone, possibly surviving, possibly deteriorating. Back at the hospital, Emily. Sterling remained unconscious, her condition stable but guarded. Detectives hoped that when she woke, she might be able to fill in the blanks, to tell them what exactly happened in those final hours before the life she knew was ripped apart. In the meantime, the public's fear grew. Media coverage exploded. Online forums buzzed with theories. Was Lucas part of a doomsday cult? Had he planned this as part of a larger act? Could he strike again? But perhaps the most chilling question of all was this. If Lucas Sterling truly believed he was chosen to cleanse others, then who might be next? By the 5th day of the manhunt, a sickening realization began to settle in for law enforcement. Lucas Sterling wasn't just in the wilderness, he belonged to it. For most fugitives, the terrain of Northern California's rugged backcountry would be a death sentence. Harsh elevation, unforgiving temperatures, unpredictable wildlife. It's the kind of place that swallows unprepared hikers whole, sometimes forever. But Lucas wasn't just prepared. He'd spent more than a decade mastering the terrain, cataloging water sources, natural shelters, and forgotten mining roads. And now he was using all of it to vanish. With each passing day, sightings trickled in, always unconfirmed, always too late. In one case, a group of campers near Bear Gulch reported hearing soft whistling just after 2 a.m. when they stepped. Out of their tent, they saw nothing, only a broken tree branch that hadn't been there before, and a faint indentation in the dirt that looked suspiciously like a footprint. A ranger investigating the claim later found a hand-dug fire pit nearby, still warm. The theory was becoming clearer. Lucas wasn't running blindly. He was circling, staying mobile, setting up temporary camps at night and covering great distances. By day, and worst of all, he wasn't leaving behind any biological evidence. No DNA, no fingerprints, not even discarded food. He knew how trackers worked because he had trained them. Back at command headquarters, located in a makeshift incident tent on the edge of the forest, maps lined the walls covered in pushpins and radius overlays. Search teams had fanned. Out in all directions, drones were deployed over ridgelines, and infrared cameras were used at night. But the forest was a vast, living labyrinth, and Lucas had the advantage. The FBI's Fugitive Apprehension Unit was now fully embedded in the search. A special agent named Carla Reyes, with years of experience tracking white supremacist survivalist groups in Montana, took lead on behavioral analysis. Her conclusion? He's not hiding in fear, he's hiding with purpose. She pointed to the journals found at the Sterling home. The pages weren't just paranoid ramblings, they were part scripture, part strategy. Lucas wrote about the cleansing fire, about removing his daughters from a dying world, but he also referenced something darker. In one journal, dated 2 months before the murders, he wrote, "I've seen the signs. One generation must burn for the next to rise. When the bloodline is purified, the final act begins." Another entry, more chilling still. "There is no Eden without sacrifice. 3 was the beginning. The 4th will complete the offering." The 4th? Investigators initially thought the 4th might refer to Emily, who, miraculously, was slowly coming out of her coma. But Reyes proposed another theory. Lucas had someone else in mind, another target. A person who, in his deluded theology, would complete the ritual. And if that were true, he wasn't just hiding. He was planning something worse. The man in the mountain. To understand how Lucas had evaded authorities for so long, experts began recreating what his survival would look like. A detailed profile of his habits, skills, and known terrain knowledge was compiled. He was likely traveling alone, carrying a 60 to 70-pound pack. He would avoid trails entirely, sticking to dry creek beds, animal paths, and high ridges With wide views, he'd sleep no more than 4 hours at a time, set traps for small game, filter river water through charcoal, cook only after dark, and bury his fires before sunrise. And one more thing, Lucas was obsessed with high ground. A map found in his ranger-issued survival guide included notations for old fire lookout towers, some abandoned since the 1970s. One of them, called Devil's Lantern, was situated at nearly 7,000 feet elevation, accessible only by a forgotten ranger trail not listed on any public hiking map. That's where the search converged. On June 4th at dawn, a 6-person tactical unit approached the Devil's Lantern Ridge line. Their movement was slow, methodical. Drones overhead captured nothing, only tree canopy and snow-tipped rocks. But as the team moved in closer, they spotted something unnatural. A tarp, camouflaged under brush and pine needles, covering what looked like a storage cache. Inside it, they found a Bowie knife, canned beans, iodine tablets, and most notably, 3 envelopes sealed with wax. Each was labeled Ava, Haley, June. The FBI stopped everything. The scene was frozen, photographed, carefully logged. Inside the envelopes were handwritten letters, each one a twisted farewell. Lucas referred to the girls as his stars, telling them they had been chosen for peace and that Daddy did what others were too weak to do. The letters were dated the day before the murders. It was the first true confirmation that Lucas had premeditated everything, but there was more. Behind a collapsed storage box was a notebook marked, "The Final Path." In it were coordinates, GPS notation scribbled, with precision, at least 5 locations. One stood out, Ravine Mile 32, Stone Altar below the falls. Search teams were dispatched immediately. What they found was a secluded, moss-covered clearing with a large flat boulder that looked eerily ceremonial. Burn marks surrounded it. Feathers and animal bones were scattered nearby. It was like something out of an ancient rite, as though Lucas had created his own religion, complete with sacred sites. But there was still no sign of him. Emily wakes back. In Santa Rosa, Emily Sterling regained full consciousness on June 5th. She couldn't speak at first. The tube down her throat and the trauma of her injuries left her weak, but she squeezed her sister Melanie's hand with unmistakable urgency. When detectives entered her hospital room the next day, Emily began writing down what happened the night her daughters were killed. What she wrote made every investigator's blood run cold. She recalled waking in the middle of the night to find Lucas sitting on the bed, fully dressed in hiking clothes, his backpack at his feet. He was crying. "I've done it," he said. "They're safe now," Emily screamed. He lunged at her with a knife, muttering phrases she didn't understand. Something about purity and the bridge of sacrifice. She fought back, biting his arm, kicking him. He stabbed her twice before she managed to crawl into the hallway and pass out. She never saw him again, but she remembered something else. Something the FBI hadn't known. Lucas had spoken of a watcher, a person he believed was monitoring their family. Emily dismissed it as paranoia, but Lucas became obsessed with the idea that their family was marked. He claimed one more needed to be sacrificed to break the curse. Emily had assumed it was nonsense, now she wasn't sure. The final letter on June 6th, the case took another unexpected turn. A letter was received at a remote ranger station near the edge of Trinity National Forest. It had no return address. The handwriting matched Lucas's journals. The note read, "To the ones still watching, I will complete what I began. You won't stop this, not with dogs or guns. The wilderness is holy. Let me finish." There was no signature. Just a small cross drawn beneath the text, one line etched longer than the other, skewed and twisted. The same cross had been found scratched into the tree bark near the family's backyard. It was his mark. The fear now shifted. Was Lucas preparing for a public act of violence? A final ritual? Another victim? The manhunt narrowed its focus to just 10 square miles. Teams were ordered to proceed as if Lucas was not just hiding, but hunting. Somewhere in those woods, a father who once taught children how to survive was now a ghost, slipping between tree lines, watching from ridge tops, clinging to his Twisted belief that murder was redemption, and he wasn't finished. He knew every blind spot, every echo in the canyons, but even ghosts leave footprints. By the 7th day of the manhunt, the pressure on authorities was growing, and so was the fear. Lucas Sterling had become more than a fugitive. He was now a symbol of the kind of predator law enforcement dreads most, one with military-level survival skills, a fractured mind consumed by spiritual delusion, and nothing left to lose. The FBI's profiling team warned that Lucas was entering what they called the terminal phase. His mission, based on journal entries and recovered writings, had always been about completion. He had already killed his 3 daughters, attempted to kill his wife. And now, if his own cryptic letters were to be believed, he had one final act to commit. The question was where and who. And then came the break they'd been hoping for. A message in the trees. It was early morning on June 7th when an experienced tracker, retired Ranger Doug Mathers, called in by the FBI, discovered something odd. A series of markings on tree trunks about 40 yards off a no-name ravine trail, previously thought inaccessible. The carvings weren't random. They were evenly spaced, about shoulder height, and etched in a curved pattern. Each symbol resembled a half-moon shape, pointing in alternating directions. A known navigation trick among seasoned survivalists. The path ended at a shallow creek, where something shimmered under the water, a rusted tin box sealed with duct tape and rocks. Inside it was a map, hand-drawn like the one recovered earlier from Lucas's home, and a note folded twice. It read, "Endgame begins. The shepherd walks alone to call the final lamb. Follow if you must, but not all who enter will. Leave." The map showed a narrow section of the forest about 2 miles from the Devil's Lantern Ridge. It wasn't a known campsite or landmark, just a rough outline with a crude arrow pointing toward a dead-end ravine labeled The Hollow. Agent Carla Reyes immediately recognized the word from one of Lucas's journal entries. The Hollow is where sin dies, where the final offering finds its echo. The decision was made. They would move in, and fast. But this time, not with a wide sweep. They were going to bait the trap. Operation Hollow Echo. By noon on June 7th, a covert unit of 10 FBI tactical agents had been deployed to the perimeter of the Hollow. Armed with tranquilizer rifles, non-lethal sound disruptors, and heat-seeking drones, the team's strategy wasn't to flush Lucas out. It was to lure him in. At the center of the ravine, under dense tree cover, agents constructed a decoy. Site, a small canvas tent, a cooking fire with smoke generators, and a backpack filled with MREs and gear resembling Lucas's own. But the most critical element wasn't the setup. It was the actor. An undercover agent dressed to resemble. A wandering survivalist, slightly injured, appearing lost and exhausted, would camp there overnight. The theory, Lucas, in his heightened paranoia and delusional state, would interpret the intruder as either a threat to his mission or a divine sign. Either way, he'd come closer, maybe even make contact. They called it Operation Hollow Echo, a play on Lucas's own words. The first sign night fell and the forest turned black. At 11:37 p.m., thermal imaging picked up a faint heat signature approximately 300 yards from the tent. It moved slowly, circling, pausing, watching. The decoy agent remained still inside the tent, a tiny microphone sewn into his collar feeding audio to the team. Then came a sound none of them expected. A whistle. 3 notes. Low. Slow. Repeated. Twice. The same pattern had been reported by campers days earlier near Bear Gulch. Lucas was there. Reyes gave the signal. No movement. No lights. Wait for approach. For 47 agonizing minutes, the heat signature moved in and out of range, circling, watching, and then nothing. The signal vanished into the hollow at first light on June 8th. Reyes and her team moved in, cautiously sweeping the perimeter around the decoy site. There were no footprints, no discarded items, but 20 yards west of the tent, pinned to a tree with a handmade bone arrow, was a scrap of paper, written on it in smudged charcoal. "I saw you watching. The lamb is not here. You're chasing shadows. Attached was a feather, unmistakably that of a red-tailed hawk known to nest in the high cliffs of Beartooth Ridge, nearly 6 miles northeast. The message was clear. Lucas had seen the trap, and worse, he'd let them know. The unexpected visitor, at 4:22 p.m. that same day while Reyes was analyzing maps, her team received an emergency call. A small farmstead on the outskirts of the forest, a private property rarely patrolled, reported a man matching Lucas Sterling's description knocking on their cabin door. The resident, a retired veterinarian named Clarence Boone, told dispatch, "He asked for water, said his name was John, but I recognized him from the news. He had that look, not right, like he wasn't all there." Boone quietly alerted his wife to call police while offering Lucas water and crackers. "He just kept talking to himself," Boone said. Said something about how the girls were safe now, that they were sleeping under stars no one could touch. When Lucas spotted Boone's wife on the phone, he bolted. By the time authorities arrived, 17 minutes later, Lucas was gone again, swallowed by the woods. But this time, he left behind something more valuable than a note: a full handprint. On the cabin's porch railing, for the first time, they had fresh forensic evidence. Emily Speaks, meanwhile, back in Santa Rosa General Hospital, Emily Sterling had finally recovered enough to speak coherently. Her first question whispered through cracked lips: "Did he get the letters?" Detectives were confused. Emily explained that Lucas had written dozens of letters to someone named David, a man he once claimed had delivered the prophecy to him. She had assumed David was a figment of Lucas's delusions, but now she wasn't sure. Emily remembered seeing one letter, hidden in a book, addressed to David Holloway, Flagstaff, AZ. She never opened it. She never knew if Lucas had mailed it. Detectives scrambled to locate any known associates with that name. They found nothing in California, but in Arizona, they got a hit. David Holloway was a former cult deprogrammer turned online conspiracy theorist. He'd been banned from several forums for promoting spiritual warfare rituals and had once been investigated in connection to an extremist group in Sedona. Could Lucas have been influenced by him? Was this the man who lit the match? And if so, was he the fourth sacrifice Lucas had referred to? Setting the real trap, the revelation shifted everything. Reyes knew they had to corner Lucas before he either harmed someone else or forced a final confrontation in public. So they devised one last trap, a false online article seeded through controlled dark web forums claiming that David Holloway had turned on his followers and denied the prophecy ever existed. They knew Lucas still had a satellite. Communicator, he might see it. They hoped it would enrage him and draw him out. The article went live at 2:01 a.m. on June 9th at 3:46 a.m. A camera trap 11 miles from the decoy tent site triggered, capturing a single frame of Lucas Sterling, face gaunt, eyes wide, clutching a knife. He was heading west, toward town, toward closure. The forest had kept him hidden, but even the shadows couldn't shelter him forever. June 9th began with the first full sun in over a week, and a bloodhound's snarl. The camera trap image of Lucas Sterling, captured at 3:46 a.m., had sent shockwaves through the command center, not because he had finally revealed himself, but because of where he was heading. Lucas wasn't going deeper into the forest. He was coming out of it. The thermal imaging and trap markers placed him heading west toward the small town of Redwood Ridge, a sleepy settlement on the edge of the Trinity Wilderness. The town had one diner, 2 gas stations, and a population just shy of 900. It also had something else. A church. Not just any church, Baksib, but Holy Fire Assembly, a small independent Pentecostal group that Lucas had briefly attended 5 years prior. It was known for its extreme views on spiritual purification, visions, and divine judgment. In one of his earliest journals, Lucas wrote, "If ever the end must begin, it begins there, where fire first met faith." Agent Carla Reyes didn't miss the reference. The coordinates on his last known path, the direction, the timing, all aligned. He wasn't just drifting back toward civilization. He was heading toward a specific place, at a specific time, to carry out what he believed would be the climax of his so-called mission, the fourth offering. But who or what was the target? Locked down in Redwood Ridge by 6:15 a.m., the entire town was placed on tactical lockdown. Local police blocked all roads leading into Redwood Ridge. Schools were canceled, businesses closed. The pastor of Holy Fire Assembly was pulled from mourning, prayer, and placed under protective custody. Law enforcement cleared the church from top to bottom, fearing Lucas had already arrived. He hadn't, but inside the sanctuary they found a disturbing clue, a small wooden cross, hand-carved, left at the altar. On it were 4 notches, 3 carved deep and the 4th barely scratched. It was his calling card, the scorekeeper. "He's telling us he's almost finished," Reyes said. "He wants an audience for the final act." They couldn't afford to wait. 10:13 a.m. The sighting at exactly 10:13 a.m. A Redwood Ridge delivery driver reported a man stumbling through the tree line behind the church, barefoot, shirtless, covered in mud. He was talking to himself and holding what looked like a long object wrapped in cloth. Police converged in under 5 minutes. The man was gone. But they found the cloth, a shredded American flag wrapped around a machete with initials carved into the handle. ASH, Ava, Sadie, and Haley. A block away, inside a nearby barn, agents discovered signs of fresh occupancy, a pile of ashes still warm, an apple core, a copy of the Book of Revelation missing the last 2 pages. They were seconds behind him, and the town was still at risk. The voice from the tower at 11:37 a.m., just as police were repositioning search teams around the town's northern ridge, a single voice crackled across an old CB radio system at the fire station. A man's voice. Hollow, calm, deliberate. "This is Lucas Sterling. The reckoning is not over. You watched as the children burned. You let the rot spread. Now the final. Cut his mind to make!" A chill filled the room. He was nearby. He wanted them to hear him. A trace confirmed it. The signal had come from a maintenance shed 400 yards behind Holy Fire Assembly. Law enforcement raced in, but found it abandoned. Except for one thing, a mirror. On it, Lucas had written in charcoal, "Face what you created." Next to it was a photograph, a copy of a sermon held in 2019 at the church, with Lucas, his 3 daughters, and Pastor Daniel Greaves. Only Lucas's face had been burned out with a cigarette. The standoff begins at 1:12 p.m. A local teenager, hiking with his uncle, spotted a man entering the old cemetery hill above Redwood Ridge, a long abandoned property behind the church once used for outdoor baptisms. It had a single structure still standing, an old stone chapel built in 1911. Now decaying and surrounded by graves nearly lost to the trees, that's where Lucas went, and he wasn't coming out. Negotiation through madness. By 2:05 p.m., a crisis negotiation team surrounded the site. Drone footage confirmed Lucas was inside. Pacing, muttering, carrying what appeared to be a flare gun and a long hunting knife. Inside, he had laid out photos of his daughters, one at each corner of the crumbling pulpit. In the center, according to drone visuals, was a 4th picture, heavily blurred, but possibly Emily, his wife. Agent Reyes took the lead on communications. They rigged a speaker and microphone to the chapel door. "Lucas, this is Carla. No one else has to die. We just want to talk. Emily's alive. She forgives you." Silence, then static. A faint, breathless voice. "She can't forgive what was required. The sacrifice. The world had to be cleansed. Lucas, your daughters didn't need saving. They needed a father." Another long pause, then, "They were angels. I set them free." 3:28 p.m. The moment breaks. Then came the tipping point. Reyes mentioned something they'd been holding back. "We found David Holloway. He's alive." "He's not who you think," Lucas screamed into the speaker. "Liar. He sent me the vision. He told me to prepare the vessel." Reyes doubled down. He recanted everything. He said you were never part of the mission. The next 20 seconds were unintelligible. Lucas shouted, pounded the walls. Then, silence again, until the unmistakable sound of a flare being loaded. 3 p.m. The end snipers reported Lucas standing at the shattered window, arms outstretched, flare gun aimed at the sky. One of the agents had eyes on him, a clean shot, but Reyes stopped him. She tried one last plea. "Lucas, your daughters wouldn't want this. They weren't sacrifices, they were children." The red dot of the flare hovered in Lucas's hand. Then he dropped to his knees. He looked directly at the drone camera above and whispered something no. One could hear, then a flash. The flare gun ignited, but instead of shooting at the sky, Lucas turned it inward, pressing it to his chest. The burst of fire was brief, searing, final. By the time agents reached him, he was already gone. Aftermath: Lucas Sterling died alone in the ruins of a chapel, surrounded by the images of the daughters he believed he had saved by killing. His body was removed under tight security. Forensics recovered his final journal, soaked in blood but legible. The last words written, "They sleep now in light. I've opened the gate." The case closed on June 10th. Emily Sterling, still recovering, declined all interviews. She later issued a statement through her attorney. "Lucas was lost long before he disappeared into the forest. He left us long before the killings. He believed he was chosen, but we were the ones left behind to carry what he destroyed." The chapel was demolished. The town of Redwood Ridge held a candlelight vigil for Ava, Haley, and Sadie, and the forest, for all its silence, remembers. Part 6. Echoes in the Ashes. Some stories don't end when the killer dies. Some haunt the silence he leaves behind. In the aftermath of Lucas Sterling's fiery end, Redwood Ridge returned to a hushed stillness, but nothing about the town or the people who lived there would ever be the same. The chapel where Lucas made his last stand was razed within a week. A pile of ash, charred wood, and blood-soaked pews were all that remained when the bulldozers rolled in. Locals didn't gather to watch, they stayed inside, doors locked, curtains drawn, as if even glancing at the ruin might let something dark seep in. But in the ash, authorities found more than just scorched wood. They found answers, and questions no one wanted to ask. The missing pages inside a hidden floor compartment beneath. The chapel altar, forensic teams discovered a rusted metal box wrapped in duct tape and burlap. Inside were several damp, half-burned journals belonging to Lucas. These weren't the same spiritual ramblings found earlier. These were confessions. One entry, dated just 4 days before the murders, read, "They said it would be the blood that sets them free, that to save the soul, the body must break. I didn't believe them at first, but the signs don't lie." The FBI would later confirm that these "they" he referred to were not imaginary. Handwriting analysis, keyword matches, and forum cross-referencing led them to the Woken Path, a digital cult operating in encrypted corners of the internet. The group, led by an anonymous figure known only as the Shepherd, promoted soul cleansing rituals for the chosen, often targeting men with violent pasts and unstable psyches. It's believed that Lucas, in his desperate search for meaning after losing his job and home, had been radicalized by their doctrines over several years. He wasn't just mentally ill, he was recruited, and there may be others. The fourth name one. Journal entry in particular rattled investigators: Ava, Sadie, Haley, and the final offering, the vessel who bore them. She will ascend last when the gate opens. When I return. He meant Emily. Lucas had never intended to kill himself. Not immediately. His mission was incomplete. The flare gun he turned on his own chest wasn't part of the plan. It was a reaction, triggered by Agent Reyes's bluff about David Holloway, and that led to the darkest theory of all. If Reyes hadn't said Holloway was alive, if Lucas hadn't panicked, would he have gone after Emily next? They'll never know for certain. But it's the reason Emily lives with permanent federal protection today. Emily Sterling, the bad survivor. After weeks in the hospital, Emily moved into a protected housing unit under a new identity. Her survival was considered both miraculous and dangerous. The press wanted interviews, documentary offers poured in. but she refused them all. Through her attorney, she gave only one statement. "I don't want to tell my story to the world. I want to survive it. That's enough." Still, what little is known about her recovery is chilling. Doctors reported Emily waking up from nightmares, screaming the same phrase over and over again. He said the forest would burn. He said I'd be ash too. She never attended her daughter's funeral. She asked that their bodies be cremated and scattered in the Pacific Ocean, far from the woods, far from the house where they died, far from everything Lucas had touched. The girls' final moments, autopsies, confirmed the horrifying truth. Ava, Sadie, and Haley had all been sedated before their deaths, but only partially. The elder two had defensive wounds. They fought back. Inside the cabin's basement, what Lucas called the prayer room, investigators found hand-drawn angel wings painted on the concrete wall. Beneath each set was a name, Ava Sadie Haley. Next to them, an unfinished fourth. Sedot authorities now believe Lucas intended to bring Emily there, kill her the same way. Complete the sacrifice, but she escaped just in time. The public response news of the Sterling family murders sent shockwaves across the country. Social media dubbed Lucas the prophet of Redwood Ridge, and online. Theorists quickly began dissecting his writings, mimicking his language, spreading his ideology. Some called him a misunderstood man of faith, others a symptom of modern madness. But to law enforcement, he was something far more dangerous. A template. An agent from the Behavioral Analysis Unit stated publicly, "Lucas isn't the last. He's just the first one who burned bright enough for us to see." Following his death, the FBI launched a full-scale investigation into the Woken Path digital network, discovering dozens of similar profiles across forums, men who believed they'd been chosen, who used spiritual language to justify violent urges. Several arrests were made, but the group's core leader, the Shepherd, was never identified. The forest today. The cabin Lucas used as his final hideout was dismantled and burned by order of the district. Locals held a small vigil there, not for Lucas, but for the girls. At the edge of the clearing where the house once stood, a handmade wooden plaque now rests. For Ava, Sadie, and Haley. Not sacrifices, not angels, just children. Visitors leave flowers there sometimes. Others leave toys, and some still leave strange messages written on bark or stones, as if trying to speak back to the myth that Lucas built. The one that got away. The most haunting thread remains this. Lucas was being guided, indoctrinated, pushed, and someone out there knew. The box of letters recovered from his hideout included several mailed replies, marked only with the symbol of a horned. Raman signed S. Experts in cult iconography confirmed it was a known sigil tied to esoteric cleansing groups traced to Idaho, West Virginia, and parts of Arizona. The fear now isn't just about what Lucas did, it's who told him to, and whether they've found someone new. The final entry, in the last page of Lucas's final journal, one message was written, not in his usual spiraling script, but in large block letters, scrawled with what appeared to be ash and water. They'll see the truth when the next lamb is chosen. Until then, I sleep beneath the flame. For the world, the Redwood Ridge killings are over. But for those who knew the Sterlings, for the agents who chased a man through the wild, for the mother who buried her daughters under new names, and for the people who still listen to the forest at night, the story never truly ends. It lingers, like a whisper in the trees, like an echo in the ashes. The case of Lucas Sterling wasn't just a story of a father-turned-killer, it was a chilling reminder of how isolation, obsession, and twisted beliefs can collide in the most unthinkable ways. While Lucas is gone, the scars he left behind, on his surviving wife, on the quiet town of Redwood Ridge, and on a nation trying to understand what drives such evil, will never fully fade. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and click the bell so you never miss the next true crime case we uncover.